Hello, General Hospital today will reveal. When Anna made her unexpected return, she did not emerge as a broken shadow of herself, but as a woman burning with fury and purpose. Her eyes spoke of horror's witness, of a captivity not just a physical, but psychological, and it was this raw intensity that struck Jason with more force than any weapon could. In that searing gaze, Jason saw the truth that upended every belief they had clung to. The nightmare named Caesar Faison had not ended. The face that had haunted his darkest memories was no longer a ghost, but a living reality Anna had narrowly escaped. Her reappearance shattered the illusion of closure. She brought back more than survival. She carried proof, detailed, chilling, undeniable, that Faison had never truly died. And in that instant, Jason knew with grim clarity that there would be no peace until the last tendril of Faison's malevolent network was scorched from existence. What lay ahead was not just a mission, but a reckoning that demanded Jason abandon hesitation and confront an enemy reborn from the ashes of deception. Empowered by Anna's testimony, Jason began retracing the threads Britt Westbourne had once reluctantly exposed. Every whisper she'd given him, every fragmented admission, now fell into place with unnerving precision. The project involving cold fusion, once dismissed as theoretical, had been a cover for something far more disturbing, a technological resurrection of a tyrant. Britt's collaboration with Ross Cullum and Jen Sidwell, initially framed as desperation for a cure for her Huntington's, now reeked of coercion and concealed horror. She had been cornered, manipulated, not only by science but by fear, especially when threats were leveled against young Rocco Falconry. As Jason pieced it all together, it became alarmingly clear that the resurgence of Sidwell and Cullum was not a coincidence. Their re-entry into the game was coordinated, strategic, and likely orchestrated to prepare the world for Faison's return, not as a man, perhaps but as a shadowless intelligence or weaponized idea. What was unfolding was no longer a mere speculation. It was a full-fledged conspiracy operating in silence, growing in the blind spots of global agencies. With this realization weighing heavily, Jason turned to the one man who would both understand the stakes and be directly affected: Dante Falconry. Not only had Dante faced threats to his family, but he also stood as one of the few who had walked the line between duty and danger alongside Jason. Their history was built on conflict, respect, and mutual survival, and when Jason presented Anna's findings and Britt's terrified confessions, Dante didn't need convincing. The shift in him was immediate. Gone was the hesitance of a man by protocol. In its place stood by a father ready to destroy anything that threatened his son. The fear in Britt's voice still rang in his ears. The fire in Anna's eyes had lit his resolve. Without ceremony, without words, Jason and Dante forged a pact, a silent covenant to bring the entire operation to its knees. But they needed more. They needed power beyond rules. They needed Sonny Corinthos. Sonny, long an emblem of the morally gray, was no stranger to wielding influence in places where the law held no reach. His name carried weight in shadows, and Jason knew that to end this war, they needed more than guns and badges. They needed reach, loyalty, and ruthlessness. Sonny did not flinch when presented with the truth. He understood the stakes instinctively, not just for Port Charles, but for the balance of power across continents. He offered his entire network safe houses, intel chains, mercenary contacts, all to support a war that would never make the headlines. His commitment was simple. If Faison still breathed, in any form, he would be eradicated. If Cullum and Sidwell intended to resurrect tyranny cloaked in science, they would not live to see it weaponized. The alliance was formed not in boardrooms or courtrooms, but in this kind of silence that precedes storms. It was a triangle of vengeance, built on loyalty, grief, and grim determination. What followed was not a single battle, but a campaign. The trio executed surgical strikes against suspected labs, eradicated encrypted data vaults, and silenced collaborators who had once hidden under diplomatic immunity. Every blow they dealt with calculated, coordinated, and merciless. Anna, though not always visible, was the ghost behind the curtain, providing intelligence, unlocking passwords, guiding them through the corridors of terror she had once been imprisoned in. Each victory came with scars. Each explosion erased not just a facility, but a part of the old world that had protected monsters like Faison. And yet, as they closed in on the central node, a hidden AI lab believed to house a digital consciousness modeled on Faison's. The neural architecture, they realized that this war was never meant to be clean. Jason's final act, the detonation of an EMP that wiped the lab from existence, wasn't just about erasing data. It was about reclaiming power from the dead, about ensuring that no fragment of Faison could ever rise again. But in doing so, they also burned a piece of themselves, leaving behind a silence more haunting than any scream. Sonny Corinthos had always been a towering figure in the shadowy corridors of power, but now, his influence became the lifeblood of the most dangerous operation Jason had ever led. His transformation from silent benefactor to active strategist marked a critical shift in the war against Faison's legacy. With his deep-rooted connections and loyal syndicate, Sonny provided not only funds and manpower, but also a surveillance web capable of tracking remnants of Faison's organization across continents. He turned his private resources into a tactical command center monitoring encrypted chatter, intercepting illegal transfers, and flagging every resurgence tied to the Cold Fusion project or the reappearance of Cullum and Sidwell. His involvement lent the mission a strategic edge it never would have achieved under law enforcement alone. This was no longer a series of reactionary strikes, it was a full-scale dismantling. And those who once whispered Faison's name as a promise of resurrection now found themselves hunted by a holy trinity of vengeance. Meanwhile, Anna, hardened by the trauma she endured and the manipulation she survived, refused to be reduced to a footnote in Faison's story. Though physically weakened, her resolve was steel. Rather than retreat into recovery, she became the silent architect behind the crusade. In her possession were stolen files, coded maps, and fragments of Faison's digital voice buried within corrupted data logs. These weren't just scattered pieces, they formed a mosaic of madness. The voice recordings revealed a man who had anticipated his own end and planned accordingly. The body once declared his was a bioengineered decoy. His consciousness, according to these files, had been uploaded through experimental neurointegration protocols designed to store, preserve, and ultimately reinstate cognition into a synthetic host. Cold fusion was never about sustainable energy, it was the battery for a resurrection. The horror was no longer theoretical. It was living science fueled by ambition, and Anna's documents proved that Port Charles had never been safe. Jason grasped the magnitude of the threat with chilling clarity. What they were facing was not just the memory of Faison, but a technological parasite engineered to survive beyond flesh. The fight was no longer about taking down men with guns or labs with bombs, it was about obliterating a legacy built to evolve. Every clue, every encrypted signal led them closer to a covert lab buried beneath a forest in Eastern Europe, where Anna had once been held captive. It was from this underground facility that most of the data transmissions originated, routed through rogue WSB servers and protected by layers of biometric security. Their attacks became surgical flash raids, high-yield incinerations, data scrubs at every terminal. No trace could remain. Jason, ever the silent executor, moved with merciless precision. Dante led the teams into the field, extracting every last fragment of intelligence. Sonny funded the movements with a blank check, never asking for restraint. They were not cleansing a network, they were erasing an ideology. In these final confrontations, the trio functioned with a shared understanding. None of them would come out of this unchanged. Jason carried the burden of command and the scars of betrayal. Dante walked the tightrope between duty and damnation, seeing firsthand how justice demanded dirty hands. And Sonny, ever the protector of his city, proved that true power lay not in fear, but in choosing what was worth destroying, to preserve what mattered. The final strike was both brutal and beautiful in its execution. The AI lab that had once pulsed with stolen thought patterns and biometric whispers was reduced to smoldering steel and corrupted ash. No servers survived. No backups escaped. In the silence that followed, standing in the ruin of science turned obsession, Jason didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply walked away knowing that this war had ended not with victory but with the satisfaction that evil, no matter how cleverly engineered, could still be burned into nothingness. In their final mission, one that would either end a nightmare or resurrect it anew, Jason, Dante, and Sonny closed in on a data facility buried beneath layers of concrete and deception. A site long believed to be dormant but secretly pulsing with something more insidious than weapon stockpiles or stolen documents. It was here that intelligence reports confirmed the existence of Faison's synthetic consciousness, stored within an experimental neural network that had been accumulating behavioral patterns, voice samples, decision-making protocols, and even corrupted emotional imprints for over a decade. The facility, designed to mimic cognitive evolution, it was not merely a place of storage. It was a digital sanctum built to rebirth a monster. Jason, emotionless but resolute, arrived with an electromagnetic pulse bomb specially engineered to fry the entire infrastructure in a single blast. As he activated the charge, the whirring servers fell into a sudden, terrified silence before being engulfed in a blinding flash of destruction. Outside, Dante shielded Britt with his own body, her eyes wide as they reflected the blaze of annihilation. And Sonny stood silently in the distance, watching the smoke climb into the sky, not just the ashes of a physical base, but of every twisted dream that had tried to make Faison immortal. But victory, as they quickly learned, came with no triumph. The silence left in the wake of the war was not one of peace but of irreversible change. Jason returned to Port Charles physically intact but spiritually fractured. The weight of his choices, the lives taken, the ethics blurred. The innocence forfeited settled into the marrow of his being like cold lead. No medal, no thanks. No comfort awaited him, only the understanding that what he had destroyed had also destroyed parts of him. Anna resumed her post at the hospital, her body healing but her gaze haunted. Even in daylight, shadows followed her. The memories of captivity. The whispers of Faison's voice, digitized and detached from flesh, still echoed in her sleep. Britt, who had watched her father's legacy burn, slipped away without a word, severing herself from the ghosts of science and the poisoned hope that once fueled her collaboration. She left behind no apology, no farewell, just a void where her redemption might have bloomed. And Dante, back at home with Rocco, looked at his son with a kind of guilt he couldn't articulate. He had kept the child safe but had sacrificed a piece of his own soul in doing so. He knew now what it meant to walk too far into the dark and still have to smile for the daylight. On a gray winter afternoon beneath a sky swollen with rain, Jason found himself alone at his father Alan's grave. The cemetery was quiet, stripped of color by the weather. Save for the old photograph, he clutched one of Anna and Britt smiling once, long before the war had broken them all. He said nothing. Words, after all, had never been Jason's strength. But the way he looked down at the stone, the way his hand gripped the photo, betrayed everything he carried. Exhaustion deeper than sleep could cure. Determination forged in grief. In that silence, Jason didn't mourn the death of Faison, he mourned the casualties of survival. The erosion of boundaries that once distinguished right from necessary. He hadn't fought to avenge. He had fought so others wouldn't have to. He had incinerated a symbol that once manipulated minds, tore apart families, and rewrote human boundaries. And yet he understood that monsters like Faison weren't confined to bodies, they were ideas. They lived in greed, in ambition, in silence. Jason knew that someday the darkness would try again. And when it did, he would be there.